What a champion he has been always to the University Club of Winter Park, even before he was a member in 2016. For years, he's written glowing reviews on the club, its intellectual climate, and its impact on the community. And for this, we thank you, Chris. And so today he's going to review 2 books by one of America's foremost philosophers, the late Richard Rorty. Chris. Please turn off your cell phones. Please turn off your cell phones.
I want to thank Linda Dunlop and Dot for inviting me again to make a presentation. They asked, I think in November, and they said, well, give me a review of a book, give me the title of the book by the end of December. And the initial challenge for me was finding a book, because for 29 years I wrote a column for the Winter Park Observer. Can you hear me all? A little higher. Is this better?
Yes.
I wish it would come up higher. And I sorely missed that process. About a year ago, they had changed management, which is typical, and they decided that they didn't want the type of column that I was writing, which is fine, and I respectfully accepted that. But nonetheless, it was a process that I was involved with for 28, 29 years. Every week, I would devote time to developing a column, and I would sometimes get an idea and a week ahead of time and jot down notes and prepare it that way. A lot of times I would just sit down at my desk on a Monday morning and go through my chat book and come up with a topic that intrigued me. And this speech today is going to be a little bit unconventional from this perspective of the way they traditionally do book reviews here. But before I get started, I want to send a shout out to a buddy of mine, Curtis Salee, who's in Chicago. Hello, Curtis. And he recently had a stroke a year ago and has spent the last year recovering. He was, I met him in 1979. I've known him 40 years. He's a big, black, powerful black man, and has been a first hire in a number of corporations in America. And he had just retired and got stricken by this and is fighting through recovery. And if anybody can do it, Uncle Curtis, you can. So, I'm going to read a few entries before I get into my lecture on the Rorty books that I took from my chat book on possible subjects for this, and I'll talk to you about how I decided ultimately to choose the Rorty. This first quote by Richard Rorty kind of sums up his philosophy. And if you're this is I've been keeping chapbooks since my mother bought one for me in the 1970s, and they're just notebooks where I would jot down ideas of subjects to write on, and I would write them down. Sometimes I wouldn't have my chapbook with me, and I'd have a piece of paper, and I'd write it down because I thought it was funny or humorous or insightful or whatever. And I said, you know, so many people says, well, just open your mind and think like me, and that just seems like a contradiction in terms. Do it any way you want is my philosophy, but if you want my opinion, there's an ownership. I'm a very strong proponent of reproductive choice. I served on the Planned Parenthood Board of Central Florida, and I firmly believe that it's nobody's business what a woman does with her body, but the woman herself. And so there's an ownership claim. When one mandates birth as the only option when a woman finds herself pregnant, self-evident to me. The irony to me is, concerning birth control, is if you don't want abortions and you don't want things of that nature, then you would make birth control in America as ubiquitous as M&Ms. And you would make sure that education and the availability of safe birth control would be readily available. But it doesn't seem like one party, political party in this country supports that concept. It's ironic to me. That strikes me as socialism for the business class. I see that all the time, yet they don't quite agree. To my father, I'm sorry I wasn't smarter earlier. I'm going to talk about my father later, but he was a stand-up guy anytime I had issues. On God, if you haven't seen Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, I highly recommend it. It's a movie of a sort, but there was a line in it that really captured my attention. He sends flies to wounds he could heal, which leads me to, on April 20th, I wrote this: I'm an atheist, and I am no more immoral for believing as I do, as you are necessarily stupid for believing as you do. You know, people all the time will ask somebody who is a secular believer, a humanist, an atheist, geez, you know, what prevents you from killing somebody, and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, what I am religious about, two things, I thought this was funny, was dental care, and my dentist would like that, and planting flowers. Initial thoughts on the ideal man. One of the first attributes I came up with would be able to write like Mark Twain and think like Emily Dickinson. And of course, you would add other attributes as well. I'm big into the apocalyptic movies, and I wondered, are redneck zombies worse than Manhattan zombies as far as from a cultural standpoint? I'm being facetious. I like this, what is said, what is heard, and what is acted upon. And you hear the word tenderloins, but what was said was tenderloins. And you know, you can go from there, and that's fairly common in a lot of our speeches. He didn't die, he got married. I've been a big, when I got my first child, Jocelyn, when I was 21, it was a watershed event in my life. It totally changed my focus. Initially, I was rather resistant to the idea. But I cannot think of a bigger gift in my entire life, other than my wife, my family, my brother, but than my daughter. She has been, we grew, as I tell her, we grew up together. But it was a jump shift as far as the way I thought as a 20-year-old and 22-year-old just changed abruptly, because I became very aware of the process in which I am an integral part of, and aging. And actually, in my mid-20s, I calculated when my father died. Well, at that point, my father had not died, but I extrapolated from my grandfather died, and I came to the conclusion I was going to check out in my early 80s. And I think, quite frankly, I'm on track for that quite comfortably. But anyway, I started reflecting on just the aging process, and one day I noticed that not only was my hair turning gray, but my nose hairs were turning gray. But men in small doses. That's particularly, I thought, current in today's environment. And then I got, every day when my boys would leave for school, I would say to them, as they walked out the door, the last words I said to them absolutely was, be a gentle man. And then I would say, emphasis on gentle. And so when I thought of this, what's wrong with, I mean, we all know what's wrong with this, but in a sense, what's wrong with gentlemen-only signs? Because I think what we're witnessing around the country today, we certainly could stand more gentlemen. To what level, sir, will you be descending? Asked the elevator operator. Debasement, sir, I responded. Well, you know, anyway. What do we do with Dad? No father wants to imagine that. I'm very specific. I'm very specific, in everybody in my family knows the end game. What the end game is going to be for me, should I have an incident, so to speak. And this leads me to the degree you decide when and how you die. To me, is a basic human right. I'm just not really interested. You know, people, you know, they want to pass these laws that gives you the right to die out in Oregon and things like that, and I think that's just absurd. Just take ownership of your end, of your death, as you lived your life. I don't think we need laws on that. Just take care of it yourself. I was reading something on Greek recently, and I saw this, and it's so applicable to a nation where, on any given election, 50 to 60% of our people don't participate in the election process, don't pay any attention to it, subscribe to fake news, and I'll And it's just, it's an indictment of our times. Just because it's common doesn't mean it isn't special. The summation of a question in one's life in comparison to all others. We have all shared experiences, and they talk about, you know, for years I made fun of common sense. And I would say, well, it's common. And anyway. I think it's okay to compare Republicans with zombies. Just because an idea won't die doesn't make it a good idea, like trickle-down economics. Got any Republicans in here? No, please don't. Don't embarrass yourself. I saw an advertisement. I have a deep radiating pain, and I just immediately, I don't know where I heard it, I said, yeah, it's called life. Anyway. A death at Safeway. I think I saw a headline, and I said, is that irony or coincidence? Anyway. Yeah, I had two sisters. When asked if I had a dishwasher growing up, and it was a time of different expectations. My job in the house in the 50s and 60s was I shoveled the walk, and I took out the garbage. That was the extent. And I think I started washing my own clothes at that point. But my sisters had kitchen duty, so it was times have changed. Everything is better in the abstract, children, wives, and husbands. Argument for cloning human beings. Who's going to take better care of you than yourself?